Lonely rancher buys a wife, but her one condition changes his entire life forever. Wild West tales. Ethan McCall had always lived alone. His ranch was far from town, a wide stretch of land with dusty trails, rolling hills, and cattle that seemed endless. The sun rose early, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and it set late, leaving long shadows that made the land feel even emptier. Ethan had learned to rise with the sun, feed the animals, mend the fences, and ride the land from dawn to dusk. His hands were rough and strong, and his boots carried the dust of years of work. Yet, no matter how busy the days were, the nights were quiet too. Quiet. Ethan's house was simple. A wooden cabin with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom that was too big for just one person. He would often sit by the fire, holding a mug of coffee, staring into the flames. The crackle of the fire was comforting, but it could not fill the emptiness inside him. Sometimes he thought about the past, about people he had known and friends he had lost. Other times he thought about the future, wondering if he would always be alone, with no laughter or warmth to share the long nights. The townspeople often spoke of Ethan with respect. He was a capable rancher, strong and reliable, but they also knew he was a man who kept to himself. Invitations to dances or town gatherings rarely found their way to him, and Ethan rarely went. He preferred the quiet life, the freedom of the open land, yet there was a loneliness that he could not ignore, a longing he had learned to hide even from himself. One afternoon, while Ethan was at the general store picking up supplies, he overheard two women talking. They were discussing a woman who had agreed to marry a rancher in exchange for a new life. The idea sounded strange, almost like a business deal, but Ethan listened closely. The woman wanted a fresh start, a chance to leave her past behind. In return, she would live on the ranch, help with the work, and become a wife. The thought lingered in Ethan's mind as he rode back to his ranch that evening. He spent the ride thinking about the possibilities. Could it be that simple? Could someone come into his life and change the empty routine of his days? Ethan had never considered buying a wife before, but now the idea seemed less shocking and more tempting. Loneliness could make even the most stubborn man consider choices he might never have imagined. By the time he returned to his cabin, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep purple. He stabled the horses, fed the cattle, and went inside, but sleep did not come easily. Thoughts of the woman, her face unknown, and the promise of companionship filled his mind. The next morning, Ethan set out for the town where the woman was said to be. His horse trotted steadily along the dusty road, the wind carrying the smell of sagebrush and dry earth. As he approached the small town, he felt a mixture of excitement and unease. He had spent his life controlling the ranch, controlling the land, but he had never controlled another person. Could he really open his life to someone new? He found her at a modest boarding house on the edge of town. Clara Bennett was nothing like he expected. She was young, with soft brown hair and clear eyes that seemed to look right through him. She was not timid or shy. She had a quiet strength, an intelligence that shone in the way she held herself. Ethan introduced himself with a nod, and they sat together in the small parlor. The room was warm from the sunlight streaming through the windows, but Ethan felt a nervous chill. Clara listened as Ethan spoke about the ranch, about his life of work and solitude. When he asked if she would consider marrying him, she did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him steadily, as if weighing his words and his intentions. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was calm and firm. She would agree to marry him, but only under one condition. She would live by her own rules, not just his. Ethan was surprised. He had expected agreement without hesitation. Her condition was unusual, almost defiant, but there was an honesty in it that he could respect. Ethan considered her words carefully. Could he truly accept a wife who demanded independence? He had spent years alone, used to making all the decisions on his own. Yet, something in Clara's eyes made him think that perhaps this was the very thing he needed. He nodded, agreeing to her terms. It was a step into the unknown, a chance to bring life and companionship into his quiet world. The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. Ethan returned to the ranch to make ready for Clara's arrival. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, mended the fences, and ensured the barns were in order. The work was tiring, but it filled his mind with purpose. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of anticipation, a hope that had been absent for too long. When Clara finally arrived, she stepped off the stagecoach with a small trunk and a determined expression. Ethan met her at the edge of the property, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. The wind carried the scent of the open plains, and the sun shone warmly on the land. This was the beginning of something new, a partnership that neither fully understood, but both were willing to try. Life on the ranch began in cautious steps. Clara explored the house, examining the rooms and the simple furniture. She asked questions about the animals, about the routines, and about the land itself. Back, Ethan watched her, impressed by her curiosity and confidence. She was not there to be a quiet helper. She was there to share the work, to share the life. Ethan realized that this was not what he had expected, but it was exactly what he needed. That first night, they ate a simple meal together, bread, cheese, and a little stew Ethan had prepared. They talked about their pasts, about dreams and fears, about the loneliness that had shaped them both. There was a silence at times, but it was comfortable, not awkward. For the first time, Ethan felt that the empty spaces in his cabin might be filled not just with a person, but with understanding, laughter, and shared stories. Sleep came slowly that night, with the quiet sounds of the ranch all around. The wind rustled the trees, the cattle murmured in the distance, and the fire crackled in the fireplace. Ethan lay awake, thinking about the life that had brought him here and the life that lay ahead. He had opened his world to someone new, someone who was not afraid to challenge him, to speak her mind, to demand respect. It was a strange feeling, a mix of fear and hope, but it was alive. By the next morning, Ethan and Clara had begun the first true day of their life together. She helped with the chores, learning the routines of the ranch while introducing small changes, improvements that Ethan had never thought of. At first he resisted, feeling that his ways were better, but slowly he began to see the wisdom in her suggestions. Clara's presence was not just a companionable one. It was a force that would shape the ranch, and perhaps shape Ethan himself. As the sun climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, Ethan realized something he had not expected. The loneliness that had defined his life was already fading. It would not disappear overnight, but the presence of Clara, her voice, her energy, her spirit, had begun to fill the empty spaces. He could not predict the future, but he felt certain of one thing. This was the start of something significant, something that would change his life forever. And so, on that first day, amidst the dust, the cattle, and the wide-open plains, Ethan McCall's life began to change. He had bought a wife, yes, but more than that, he had invited a new life into his heart. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, laughter, and hard work, but for the first time in many years, Ethan felt ready to face them. Not alone, but together. The first few days at the ranch were a whirlwind of new routines and small discoveries. Clara Bennett had arrived with quiet confidence, and from the very beginning, It was clear that she would not be the kind of wife to quietly follow orders. She had made her condition very clear. She would live by her own rules, contribute her ideas, and speak her mind. Ethan McCall, who had spent his life in complete control of his land and his work, was at first unsure how to handle it. Clara started by exploring the ranch. She walked the fences, inspected the barns, and checked on the animals with keen eyes. She asked questions about the livestock, how the cattle were fed, how often the horses were exercised, and where the water troughs were located. Ethan answered, trying to explain his methods, but Clara listened carefully, and then suggested small improvements. "If we move the water trough closer to that shaded area," she said one morning, "the cattle will stay cooler during the hot afternoons." Ethan had never thought of that. He frowned, trying to imagine changing something he had done the same way for years. But when he followed her advice, he saw the cattle behaving exactly as she said. Her mind was sharp, and her confidence matched it. She did not argue for the sake of arguing, but she insisted on doing things in a way that made sense to her. At first, Ethan felt a mix of frustration and admiration. He had expected a quiet, obedient wife, someone to cook, clean, and keep the house in order. Clara was not that at all. She was thoughtful, capable, and independent. Ethan realized that he could not treat her as a simple helper. She was a partner, and he would need to respect her mind and her ideas. Their days quickly filled with activity. Together they fed the animals, repaired fences, and checked the water lines. Clara learned to ride the horses and handle the cattle, surprising Ethan with her skill and courage. She was not reckless, but she had a steady hand and a clear mind. Watching her, Ethan felt a new kind of respect for her. She was not only his wife, she was someone who could handle the demands of ranch life as well as he could. Yet, it was not all easy. Arguments arose, as they inevitably did when two strong-willed people shared a home. Clara insisted on doing things her way at times, and Ethan struggled to let go of control. One afternoon, while mending a broken fence post, Ethan's patience snapped. "Clara, why can't you just follow the way it's always been done?" he asked, his voice sharp with frustration. Clara looked at him calmly, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Ethan," she said softly, "I am here to help, not to fight. But I cannot do things the way you want if it does not make sense to me. I can learn and I can follow, but I need to understand why we do things a certain way." Her words were firm but not unkind. Ethan stared at her for a moment, feeling the heat of irritation and the warmth of admiration at the same time. He realized she was right. He had always worked alone, never having to explain his methods or compromise. Now he had to. Slowly, Ethan began to adjust. He asked questions, listened more, and allowed Clara to take the lead on some tasks. It was strange at first to let someone else's ideas shape the ranch, but he noticed improvements he had never seen before. The fence was stronger, the water system worked better, and the cattle were healthier. He began to see that Clara's independence was not a threat. It was a gift. Evenings were filled with quiet companionship. After the work was done, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara would talk about her past, about her dreams, and about her hopes for the future. Ethan listened, sharing his own memories and thoughts. The conversation was easy, natural, and honest. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly connected to another person. The emptiness he had lived with for so long was slowly filling with laughter, stories, and shared plans. Clara also brought a new sense of order and comfort to the house. She cleaned, organized, and arranged things in a way that made daily life smoother. But she never imposed herself. She worked alongside Ethan, not above or below him. She encouraged him to rest when he was tired, to eat properly, and to enjoy small moments that he had ignored for years. It was not just the work she changed. It was the way life felt. The cabin felt warmer, brighter, and alive in a way it had never been before. Despite the growing comfort, Ethan still struggled with his pride. There were moments when he wanted to do everything himself, to resist her suggestions, and to maintain control. Clara noticed this, but she never forced him. She waited patiently, letting him see for himself that compromise often led to better results. Her patience was a quiet strength, one that slowly earned Ethan's trust and respect. As days turned into weeks, the ranch flourished under their combined care. Clara's ideas had improved routines and her skills had made the work lighter. Ethan noticed that he laughed more, worked with less stress, and even began to enjoy tasks he had once found tedious. He found himself talking to Clara about decisions he had always made alone. Realizing that her perspective made him wiser and more confident, the townspeople began to notice the change as well. When Ethan and Clara rode into town together, people commented on the strength of their partnership. Some whispered about how unusual it was for a woman to be so independent, yet respected and admired by a man like Ethan. The couple paid little attention to the gossip, but inside, Ethan felt proud. Clara's independence was not a threat. It was the very thing that made her remarkable. One evening, after a long day of work, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and heavy rain began to fall. The wind howled, shaking the cabin and rattling the windows. Ethan and Clara rushed to secure the animals and protect the property. Clara led with calm precision, giving instructions and helping where needed. Ethan followed her lead, trusting her instincts. The storm was fierce, but together, they managed to keep the ranch and themselves safe. After the storm passed, they stood outside, watching the sun return to the sky and the land glisten with rain. Ethan looked at Clara, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He realized that her condition, the insistence on independence, had been exactly what he needed. It had not been a challenge to overcome, but a gift that had reshaped his life. Her strength, intelligence, and courage had already proven invaluable. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ethan felt a new understanding settle in his heart. Clara was not just a wife he had bought for companionship. She was a partner who challenged him, inspired him, and brought life to the empty spaces he had once known. Their bond was growing, quiet and steady, like the roots of a tree reaching deep into the soil. He no longer feared her independence. He welcomed it, knowing it would strengthen their life together. Clara smiled as she spoke about plans for the next day, repairing a section of fence, checking the water troughs, and planting a small vegetable garden. Ethan listened, nodding, eager to work with her, not against her. He felt a sense of peace he had not known for years. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was becoming a home filled with laughter, care, and shared purpose. By the end of the second week, Ethan understood that life with Clara would not be simple, but it would be full of learning, full of laughter, and full of challenges that they could face together. He no longer feared change or compromise. Instead, he embraced it, knowing that this partnership would transform not only the ranch but his very life. For the first time, Ethan McCall felt that he was no longer alone. The ranch was thriving, the work was meaningful, and the nights were no longer empty. Clara's presence brought warmth, intelligence, and a steady strength that reshaped everything he had known. He realized that life was not about control or solitude. It was about connection, respect, and the willingness to grow together. And so, with each day, Ethan learned to trust Clara's wisdom, her skills, and her heart. He had bought a wife, yes, but He had gained a partner who would forever change his life. The ranch was no longer just a place of work and dust. It was a home filled with hope, companionship, and the promise of a new beginning. The days ahead would be long, sometimes difficult, but Ethan knew that with Clara by his side, life would never feel empty again. Life on the ranch had begun to settle into a rhythm, but it was far from easy. Ethan McCall had learned to respect Clara's independence, and Clara had learned to understand the routines and challenges of ranch life. Their partnership was growing stronger each day, built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. But as much as they had adapted to each other, the outside world had its own plans, and challenges were beginning to loom on the horizon. One early morning, Ethan was tending the cattle when Clara rode out behind him on her horse, her long braid bouncing in the wind. The sky was pale blue, and the sun had just begun to warm the open plains. Clara carried a small notebook in her hand, jotting down observations about the land, the fences, and the animals. She paused to point out areas where the soil was dry and suggested a better place to dig a new well. Ethan nodded, impressed once again by her insight. He had grown used to her guidance, but he never stopped being amazed by her intelligence and determination. As they worked together, Ethan noticed the first signs of trouble. A group of riders appeared in the distance, kicking up dust as they approached the ranch. Ethan tensed, squinting against the morning sun. He recognized them from town, rough men who had been known to cause trouble for other ranchers. They were looking for cattle to steal, and their eyes lingered on Ethan's herd. Ethan's heart quickened. He had always been able to handle small threats alone, but these men were more dangerous than any trouble he had faced before. Clara, noticing his unease, rode closer. "We can handle this together," she said calmly. Her voice carried no fear, only determination. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. He realized that her presence was not just comforting, it was empowering. He was no longer facing challenges alone. The men rode onto the ranch, laughing and shouting, trying to intimidate Ethan. He stepped forward, his hand resting on his rifle, while Clara dismounted and stood beside him. "This is our land," Ethan said firmly. "You will not take anything from us," one of the men sneered. "And who's going to stop us?" "You alone?" Clara spoke then, her voice steady and commanding. "We are both standing here. You will leave now, or you will regret it." Her words carried a strange authority, a confidence that surprised even Ethan. The men hesitated, glancing at each other. They had expected an easy target, but instead they found a united front. Slowly they turned their horses and left, grumbling and muttering threats under their breath. Ethan exhaled, his heart still racing. "You were incredible," he said, looking at Clara. "I don't know if I could have done that alone." Clara smiled faintly. "You wouldn't have had to. That's what partners do. They face challenges together." The counter left Ethan thinking. Clara's independence, her insistence on living by her own rules, had already proven invaluable. She was not just his wife. She was a protector, a strategist, and a companion who could handle the unexpected. The realization settled in his mind: their marriage was not a convenience or a transaction. It was a true partnership. Days passed, and the ranch continued to thrive. But the challenges did not end with the outlaws. A severe drought struck the region, leaving the pastures dry and the water troughs nearly empty. The cattle grew restless, and the soil cracked under the relentless sun. Ethan and Clara worked tirelessly, digging new wells, hauling water from distant streams, and rationing supplies carefully. It was exhausting work, but they faced it together, learning to rely on each other in ways they had never imagined. Clara's presence brought more than just skill to the ranch. She brought new ideas and a fresh perspective. She suggested planting drought-resistant crops, rotating grazing areas, and building a small irrigation system. Ethan listened, learning to trust her judgment and expertise. Slowly, he began to see the ranch in a new light, not just as a place of hard work, but as a home that could thrive with care, planning, and partnership. Evenings were a time for reflection and shared stories. After the long days, they would sit by the fire, the sky darkening above the open plains. Clara would tell tales of her childhood, her dreams, and the reasons she had insisted on independence. Ethan listened, sharing his own stories of a lonely life spent on the ranch. They laughed, teased each other, and sometimes argued, but always with respect and honesty. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Ethan found himself watching Clara as she repaired a broken fence. Her movements were precise, her focus unwavering. He realized that he had never seen a woman so capable, so determined, and so unafraid of hard work. His admiration for her deepened, and he felt a sense of gratitude for the life they were building together. But life on the ranch was not without its dangers. One night, a fire broke out in the dry grass near the barn. The flames spread quickly, fueled by the parched land and strong winds. Ethan and Clara sprang into action, working side by side to save the livestock and protect the property. Clara carried buckets of water, guided the animals to safety, and helped Ethan control the blaze. Their combined effort prevented disaster, but the fire left its mark, a reminder of the constant threats that came with life on the open plains. Through these trials, Ethan saw the depth of Clara's character. She was brave, intelligent, and steadfast. Her condition, her insistence on independence, was not a challenge to overcome, but a source of strength. She had transformed his world, teaching him patience, teamwork, and the value of shared responsibility. He realized that he had fallen in love with more than just her presence. He had fallen in love with her mind, her courage, and her unwavering spirit. The days that followed were quieter, but no less meaningful. They repaired the damage from the fire, rebuilt the fences, and ensured the animals were safe and healthy. Ethan found himself consulting Clara on decisions he had always made alone, appreciating her insight and perspective. Their conversations were thoughtful, collaborative, and sometimes filled with humor. The ranch was no longer a place of solitary labor. It had become a home where two people worked together, learned from each other, and grew stronger as a team. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a neighboring ranch, inviting Ethan and Clara to a small town gathering. At first, Ethan hesitated, unsure if he wanted to leave the ranch. But Clara encouraged him to go, promising that it would be an opportunity to connect with the community and strengthen their relationships. Together they rode into town, side by side, their partnership evident to all who saw them. The townspeople welcomed them warmly, impressed by the harmony and respect between the couple. The gathering was a moment of joy and connection. Clara spoke confidently with other ranchers' wives, sharing tips and advice about managing homes and animals. Ethan spoke proudly of their work on the ranch, acknowledging Clara's contributions and the successes they had achieved together. It was clear to everyone that this was not a marriage built on convenience or necessity. It was a true partnership, forged through mutual respect, hard work, and shared challenges. As the sun set over the town, Ethan and Clara rode home together, the sky painted in deep purples and golds. The ride was quiet, comfortable, and filled with a sense of peace. Ethan realized that life had changed in ways he had never imagined. The loneliness that had defined him for so long was gone. In its place was companionship, trust, and a shared purpose that made every challenge easier to face. Back at the ranch, they prepared for the coming days, knowing that life would continue to bring challenges, storms, droughts, and unexpected visitors. But Ethan no longer feared the future. With Clara by his side, he felt capable of handling whatever came their way. Her independence, her strength, and her wisdom had transformed his life, teaching him that true partnership was about equality, respect, and trust. The ranch flourished under their care, not just because of hard work, but because of the shared vision and determination they brought to each task. The animals were healthier, the land was better managed, and the home was filled with laughter, stories, and a sense of belonging that Ethan had never known. He realized that the condition Clara had insisted upon, her independence, was the very thing that had made their marriage strong and their life together meaningful. As night fell over the wide open plains, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. The world was quiet, filled with the sounds of nature and the distant calls of animals. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. Life had given him more than companionship. It had given him a partner, a friend, and a guide who had shown him that life could be richer and more rewarding than he had ever imagined. He took Clara's hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength that had become a constant in his life. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "We do this together," she replied. "Always." And in that moment, Ethan understood fully that the loneliness of his past was gone forever. He had found not just a wife, but a life partner, someone whose independence, courage, and heart had reshaped his world. Together they were ready to face whatever challenges the future held, side by side, strong and united. Life on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, but Ethan McCall and Clara Bennett knew that peace was often fragile on the wide open plains of the Wild West. Their partnership had grown strong, their bond had deepened, and the ranch had begun to flourish under their combined care. Yet the challenges that tested their courage, trust, and teamwork were far from over. One morning, Ethan woke to find the sky gray and heavy with clouds. The wind carried an unusual chill, and the air smelled of rain, though the storm seemed distant at first. He could see the tension in Clara's expression as she came out of the cabin, her arms crossed over her chest. "Something doesn't feel right," she said. Her voice was calm but alert, carrying the authority that Ethan had grown to respect so much. "We need to check the fences and the animals before the storm hits." Together they rode across the ranch, inspecting the fences and ensuring that the livestock were safe and secure. The wind picked up, tugging at their hats and whipping dust across the open plains. It was not just a storm that threatened them. Something about the way the clouds rolled in, dark and heavy, signaled real danger. Ethan felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the old instinct for protection rising to the surface. But he no longer faced these challenges alone. Clara rode beside him, her eyes scanning the land with sharp attention, ready to act. As the storm hit, rain poured in heavy sheets, soaking the land and turning the dirt roads into muddy streams. Thunder rolled across the plains, and lightning lit the sky with brilliant, jagged flashes. The barn roof shook under the force of the wind, and the cattle became restless, their lowing mixing with the sound of the storm. Ethan and Clara worked tirelessly, moving animals to safer areas, securing loose boards, and checking the smaller structures for damage. They were exhausted, wet to the bone, but neither wavered. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch drenched and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. Ethan and Clara stood side by side, watching the damage and assessing what needed to be fixed. "We managed well," Ethan said, though his voice carried fatigue. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara smiled, shaking the rain from her hair. "We are a team," she said. "We face these challenges together." Her words, simple as they were, carried a weight that Ethan felt deep in his chest. He had once thought a partnership with a wife meant comfort and companionship, but now he knew it meant strength, courage, and trust. Clara had shown him that challenges were easier to face with someone by your side, someone who cared just as much as he did. Days after the storm, as they repaired the fences and rebuilt a section of the barn roof, trouble arrived in a new form. A neighboring rancher, envious of Ethan's thriving land and the efficiency with which he and Clara worked, approached with complaints and thinly veiled threats. He claimed that Ethan's cattle had wandered onto his property, and though Ethan knew it was untrue, he had to defend himself. Clara stood with him, calm and confident, challenging the accusations with clear reasoning and a strong voice. Together, they presented their case to the neighboring rancher, who eventually backed down, though not without leaving a sense of unease. The experience left Ethan with a renewed respect for Clara. She was not just his wife. She was his advocate, his equal, and someone who could handle confrontation without fear. Her independence, once a source of uncertainty for him, had become the very strength that protected their home and their livelihood. He realized that the conditions she had set, the freedom to live by her own rules, had not weakened their partnership. It had strengthened it beyond measure. Amid these external challenges, the bond between Ethan and Clara deepened in quieter, more personal ways. They shared stories late into the night, sitting by the fire and talking about their dreams, their fears, and the moments that had shaped them. Clara spoke of her childhood, of the reasons she had insisted on independence, and of the hopes she had for the future. Ethan shared his own past, the loneliness that had defined him, and the realization that life could be richer when shared with someone who truly understood him. One evening, after a long day of work repairing fences and moving cattle to safer pastures, Clara suggested a walk across the ranch. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the rolling hills and the dusty trails. They walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, a comfortable silence settling between them. "I never imagined life could be like this," Ethan said quietly. "Busy, hard, and yet full." Clara looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Life is full when you face it together," she replied. "We have each other, and that makes all the difference." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He had once thought love was a luxury, something to be found after life was complete. Now he knew that love, partnership, and respect were the foundations that made life whole. As the weeks passed, the ranch continued to thrive, but danger was never far. One night, a fire broke out in the distant hills, driven by strong winds toward the grazing fields. Ethan and Clara sprang into action immediately. Together, they led the cattle away from the flames, carrying water and guiding animals to safety. Clara's quick thinking and calm demeanor saved many of the animals, while Ethan's strength and determination ensured no one was left behind. The fire was eventually controlled, but it left the land scorched in places and reminded them both of the fragility of life in the Wild West. Through all these trials, Ethan learned more about Clara than he ever could have imagined. She was brave, intelligent, and steadfast. Her independence was not a challenge, it was a shield, a source of insight and protection that he could rely on. She had transformed his lonely life into one filled with courage, partnership, and purpose. Even in moments of exhaustion and struggle, they found time to laugh. After long days of work, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories of the day's events and teasing each other gently. Clara's laughter was a sound Ethan had never known he needed. It filled the cabin with warmth and reminded him of the joy that could be found even in hard work. Their partnership extended beyond the ranch. When they rode into town for supplies or to visit neighbors, people noticed the respect and affection between them. Ethan's friends commented on how Clara spoke confidently, handled herself with intelligence, and contributed to the decisions about the ranch. She was no longer just a wife. She was a partner in every sense of the word, earning admiration and respect from everyone who knew them. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken water trough together, Ethan paused to watch Clara work. She moved with purpose, her hands steady, her eyes focused. He realized how much he had learned from her, not just about ranch life, but about life itself. Patience, courage, respect, and partnership were lessons he had never fully understood until Clara had come into his life. She had changed not just his routines, but his heart and mind as well. By the end of the 4th week, Ethan and Clara had faced storms, fires, envy, and exhaustion. Each challenge had tested their strength, patience, and trust. Yet through it all, their bond had grown stronger. They had learned to rely on each other, to share responsibility, and to face adversity as a team. The ranch was not just surviving, it was thriving, thanks to the combined efforts and wisdom of both husband and wife. At night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. Clara had not just entered his life, she had transformed it. The loneliness that had once defined him was gone. In its place was a life full of partnership, respect, and love. He realized that her condition, the insistence on independence, had been the key to their success. It had allowed them to grow together as equals, facing every challenge with courage and unity. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he felt the warmth of her presence. The ranch, the land, and the animals were safe for now, but more importantly, he knew that their partnership could withstand anything the future might bring. Together, they had faced trials and emerged stronger. Together, they would continue to build a life full of hope, purpose, and shared dreams. Ethan held her hand, squeezing gently. "I never imagined life could be this full," he said quietly. Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. "Life is full when it's shared," she replied. And in that moment, Ethan knew it was true. The lonely rancher he had once been no longer existed. The life he had built with Clara was rich, meaningful, and filled with love. Their partnership was more than a marriage. It was a bond forged through challenges, strengthened by trust, and guided by mutual respect. The plains around them were wide and untamed, but together they had found a home, a purpose, and a life that neither had expected but both now treasured. The ranch had survived the storms, fires, and threats, but life was never simple in the Wild West. Each day brought new work, new challenges, and new lessons. Ethan McCall had long ago accepted that the land demanded effort, and Clara Bennett had taught him that challenges were best faced together. Their partnership had grown deeper not only through shared labor but through trust, respect, and love. One crisp morning, Ethan woke early, feeling the sun on his face as it rose over the horizon. He glanced toward the barn and saw Clara already at work, tending to the animals. Her hair was tied back neatly, her sleeves rolled up, and her hands moving quickly but carefully. Ethan felt a swell of admiration. This was the woman who had changed his life, who had brought light to his lonely days and strength to his weary heart. Clara noticed Ethan watching her and smiled. "Good morning," she said warmly. "The cows are restless. I think they know something is coming." Ethan mounted his horse and rode beside her. "You always know what's coming," he said with a chuckle. "I don't know how you do it," Clara shrugged. "Experience, observation, and paying attention. You'll learn too if you keep watching. They rode together across the land, checking fences, moving cattle, and inspecting the pastures. Every task they undertook now felt smoother, easier, and more natural. Their rhythm was in sync. Ethan handed Clara tools when needed, and she guided him when her insight suggested a better approach. Their partnership had grown so strong that the land itself seemed to respond to their teamwork. Later that day, as they repaired a broken section of fence near the northern edge of the property, Clara paused. She looked at Ethan seriously, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you realize how far we've come? This ranch, this life, it's different now. We built it together." Ethan nodded, resting against his shovel. "I do. I never imagined life could feel like this. You've changed everything." Clara smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "Not changed everything, made it better. We did it together." Their words hung in the air like a promise. Life was not perfect. There were still chores to do, animals to tend, and fences to mend, but there was a peace now that had never existed before. The fear of loneliness, the burden of solitude, had vanished. Ethan knew it would never return. He had Clara, and she had him, and together they had created something enduring. One afternoon, a group of neighbors arrived at the ranch, bringing news and a gift of freshly baked bread and preserves. The neighbors were curious about the success of Ethan and Clara's partnership. They had seen the ranch thriving while other nearby properties struggled with drought, theft, or neglect. They asked questions about the work, the care of the animals, and the management of the land. Clara answered confidently, explaining how they rotated pastures, conserved water, and repaired fences efficiently. Ethan added details about the day-to-day labor, sharing credit for every success with Clara. The neighbors were impressed, not just with the productivity of the ranch, but with the respect and harmony between the couple. Ethan realized that their relationship was no longer private. It had become an example, a symbol, of how trust and partnership could create success even in harsh conditions. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Ethan and Clara rode together to check on the western pastures before settling in for the evening. The air was cool and clean, the sky painted with shades of pink, orange, and gold. They paused at the edge of a hill, looking over their land. It was vast, rugged, and wild, but it was also home. Every fence, every pasture, every barn was a testament to their work, their courage, and their unity. Clara dismounted and walked to Ethan's side. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet pride. "All of it?" "This is ours. We built it." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength of her presence. "Yes," he said. "And it's more than just land or cattle. It's life. And it's ours. Thanks to you." Clara shook her head gently. "No, Ethan. Thanks to both of us. We faced every challenge together. You wouldn't have done it alone, and I couldn't have either." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the sunset. It was a quiet moment, full of understanding and appreciation. The hardships, the storms, the dangers, they had all shaped them, made them stronger, and brought them closer. The life they had built was not easy, but it was worth every struggle. As night fell, the ranch grew quiet, filled only with the sounds of the animals settling down and the wind moving gently through the grass. Ethan and Clara returned to the cabin, lighting the fireplace and preparing a simple meal. They ate together, sharing stories of the day, their laughter filling the small space with warmth. Later, as they sat on the porch under a sky full of stars, Ethan took Clara's hand in his. "I never thought a condition, a rule you set, could bring so much to my life," he said quietly. I thought it might make things hard, but it's given me more than I could have imagined. You've changed my life, Clara, forever." Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "That's what I hoped for," she said softly. "A life where we both matter, where we both shape the future together. You trusted me, and I trusted you. That's why it works." Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. The lonely rancher he had been was gone. In his place was a man with a partner, a friend, and a companion who brought courage, wisdom, and warmth to every day. Their life was not perfect. Storms, work, and challenges would continue, but it was rich with love, trust, and shared purpose. The following weeks were filled with growth and small joys. The ranch continued to thrive, and Ethan and Clara worked side by side, learning from each other and building a home filled with laughter and care. They planted a small garden, repaired fences, and tended the animals, always consulting each other and sharing decisions. Every success was sweeter because it was shared. Every problem felt smaller because it was faced together. One morning, after the work was done, Clara suggested a walk across the newly planted garden. The sun was warm on their faces, and the wind carried the scent of fresh soil and growing plants. "Look at this," Clara said, gesturing to the rows of vegetables. "This is the future. What we've planted today will feed the ranch, our lives, and everyone who comes after us." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The life they had built was more than survival. It was growth, hope, and promise. Clara had transformed his perspective, teaching him patience, respect, and the value of partnership. The conditions she had set, the insistence on independence, had been the very thing that made their life rich and enduring. Evenings were quiet and filled with shared moments. They would sit together by the fire or on the porch, talking, laughing, and dreaming. Ethan no longer feared the future or the unknown. With Clara beside him, he felt ready to face anything. He had learned that life was not meant to be endured alone. It was meant to be shared, built together, and cherished. One night, after a long day of work, Ethan looked out over the land. The ranch was peaceful, the animals safe, and the skies clear. Clara came to his side, and they stood together, hands clasped. "We've come so far," Ethan said softly. Clara smiled. "And we still have so far to go, but I wouldn't want anyone else by my side." Ethan laughed softly, feeling the truth of her words deep in his heart. The loneliness that had haunted him for so many years was gone. His life was no longer just work and isolation. It was love, partnership, and shared purpose. Every challenge they had faced had made them stronger. Every day they spent together had brought them closer. The ranch, the land, and the open plains were wide and untamed, but with Clara beside him, Ethan felt that nothing was impossible. Together they had built not just a home, but a life full of hope, trust, and love. The lonely rancher was no more. In his place was a man who had discovered the joy of partnership, the strength of shared dreams, and the warmth of a love that could endure every storm. As the stars sparkled above and the night wrapped the ranch in a gentle calm, Ethan held Clara close. "Forever," he whispered. Clara pressed her hand to his chest. "Together," she replied. And in that moment, the Wild West stretched wide and endless before them, full of challenges, adventures, and the promise of tomorrow. They faced it side by side, stronger together than they could ever be alone. The life they had built was more than a ranch or a home. It was a testament to courage, partnership, and love. It was a life changed forever by one condition, one woman, and a willingness to face the unknown together. And for Ethan and Clara, that was enough. It was everything.